They didn't just steal my company. They stole 18 years of my life. And the sickest part? I almost thanked them for it. 3 weeks before my wedding, I unlocked the office safe to grab some paperwork for a bank appointment. Aurora wanted us to rent a safety deposit box before the honeymoon because, according to her, successful couples should protect their future. It sounded smart, responsible. I remember actually smiling while I spun the combination, thinking how lucky I was. My company had just landed the biggest contract of my life. I was marrying the woman I'd loved for 5 years, and the only person I trusted as much as her was Nolan, the guy who'd practically been my brother since we were 5 years old. Back then, if someone had asked me to describe my life in one sentence, I would have said, everything finally worked out. God, I was an idiot. I met Nolan in kindergarten after he punched another kid for stealing my toy truck. The teacher made us sit together as punishment. By the end of the day, we were trading cookies, like we'd known each other forever. We grew up on the same street, played baseball in the same empty lot every summer, skipped school together exactly once, got caught together, got grounded together, and somehow laughed through every disaster. People used to joke that if one of us robbed a bank, the other would already have the getaway car running. He wasn't the smartest guy in the room. I usually was. But Nolan could talk to anybody. Teachers loved him. Neighbors trusted him. Girls remembered him. If I built something, Nolan could sell it before I finished explaining what it did. We balanced each other perfectly. At least that's what everyone believed, including me. By the time we were in college, I was already obsessed with software development. I wasn't the stereotypical genius living in a basement, but coding made more sense to me than people ever did. I could spend 16 hours debugging without noticing I'd forgotten to eat. Patterns never lied. Computers never manipulated you. If something broke, there was always a reason. People were different. I just hadn't learned that lesson yet. Aurora came into my life during my last year at college. I still remember the first time I saw her. She was standing in line at a coffee shop, arguing with the cashier because the elderly man behind her couldn't afford breakfast. Before anyone else reacted, she quietly paid for his meal and acted like it was nothing. No dramatic speech, no waiting for applause. She just grabbed her coffee and walked away. I chased her outside because, honestly, I wanted to know if people like that actually existed. She laughed when I almost dropped my coffee trying to catch up with her. "You ran all the way out here for that?" "I think so," I said. "That's either really sweet or really weird. I haven't figured out which," she smiled. "I'll let you know." That stupid conversation turned into dinner. Dinner became weekends together. Weekends became years. She fit into my life so naturally that even my parents started calling her their future daughter before I proposed. And Nolan? He loved her too, not like that. At least that's what I believed. He always called her my future sister. She called him the brother I never had. The three of us became inseparable. Friday dinners, football games, road trips, birthdays, holidays. My mom once looked around the table during Thanksgiving and smiled. "I hope you three never change." None of us answered. If someone had told me then that those words would haunt me for years, I'd have laughed in their face. After graduation, I spent almost 18 months building software that started as nothing more than an idea scribbled across 3 stained notebooks. It was an AI-powered logistics platform that could predict supply chain disruptions before they happened. I lived on energy drinks, frozen pizza, and maybe 4 hours of sleep a night. Aurora stayed with me through all of it. She'd leave little notes beside my keyboard. "Remember to eat. Remember to sleep. Remember I'm still your girlfriend." Those notes meant everything to me. Or maybe they were just part of the performance. The first version barely worked. Honestly, it crashed so often that I almost deleted the entire project twice. Every time I fixed one bug, 3 more showed up. Some nights I'd just sit there staring at the monitor, convinced I'd wasted almost 2 years chasing something nobody would ever buy. Aurora would come into my apartment around midnight, carrying takeout, slide the food onto my desk, without saying much, and rub my shoulders while I kept typing. "You're gonna figure it out," she'd whisper. "You always do." Hearing that from the person you love does something to you. It makes you ignore exhaustion. It makes you believe impossible things are only temporary. Then one Tuesday morning, everything changed. I uploaded another build before grabbing coffee, expecting the usual list of complaints from beta testers. Instead, my inbox exploded. Companies that had ignored my emails for months suddenly wanted meetings. One logistics director wrote, "We've never seen software predict disruptions with this level of accuracy." I reread that sentence at least 20 times because I honestly thought somebody was joking. By lunchtime, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Investors, tech blogs, recruiters, people who'd never answered me before, suddenly acted like they'd known I was brilliant all along. That afternoon, I called Nolan. He showed up within 30 minutes, carrying cheap beer and grinning like we'd just won the lottery. "I freaking told you," he shouted before I even opened the door. "I told you this thing would print money. I haven't made $1 yet. You will." He looked around my apartment at the whiteboards covered in algorithms and laughed. "But you're gonna screw it up if you keep handling the business side?" He wasn't wrong. I knew software, I knew architecture, databases, security, machine learning. Ask me to negotiate with investors or understand tax law, and I might as well have been reading another language. Nolan had graduated with a finance degree and spent several years working in corporate accounting. He understood contracts, regulations, trademarks, taxes, licensing, all the things that made my head hurt after 5 minutes. So he made me an offer. "You build," he said, pointing at my laptop. "I'll protect what you build." What does that even mean? It means I'll handle every piece of boring crap that keeps companies alive. Lawyers, patents, investors, taxes, payroll, contracts, compliance. You focus on changing the world, and I just trust you?" He looked offended. "Carter, we've trusted each other since kindergarten." He didn't have to say anything else. A month later, we officially founded the company. Looking back now, I can still picture every document sitting on that conference table. There were stacks of contracts thicker than phone books. The attorney kept explaining clauses that sounded like another language. I skimmed maybe the first page of the first document before my eyes glazed over. Nolan leaned toward me. "Standard incorporation paperwork." "You sure?" He rolled his eyes dramatically. "Bro, if I wanted to screw you over, do you think I'd wait 18 years? Everyone laughed, including me. I signed again. By the end of the afternoon, my hand actually hurt from writing my name so many times. I never read more than a few paragraphs, not once. If anyone watching had paused the scene and told me, "Read every page," none of this would have happened. But that's not how real life works. Disasters don't arrive wearing warning labels. For the first year, everything was unbelievable. Our software spread faster than any of us expected. Clients renewed contracts almost immediately. Word of mouth did more marketing than we ever could. We hired engineers, designers, support staff. We moved from a cramped co-working space into an office with glass conference rooms overlooking downtown. The day we hung our company logo in the lobby, Nolan wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Remember building websites in your mom's garage? I remember your mom yelling because we blew the circuit breaker." He laughed so hard he almost dropped his coffee. "And now look at us." For a while, it really felt like we'd made it. The first 7-figure payment hit our account on a rainy Thursday morning. I just stared at the banking dashboard in disbelief. 7 digits. Real money. Money that meant my parents could finally retire. Money that meant Aurora and I could buy the house she'd been showing me online for months. Money that meant our future wasn't a dream anymore. That night, we celebrated at our favorite steakhouse. Aurora reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm so proud of you." Nolan raised his glass. "To family." I remember thinking those 2 words sounded perfect. I didn't realize they were already planning how to destroy mine. A few months after the international contract closed, little things started changing. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just enough to make me feel like something was slightly off without being able to explain why. Nolan began disappearing into meetings I'd never heard about. Whenever I asked who he was meeting, he'd answer casually. Accounting stuff, tax strategy, lawyers. Nothing exciting. Then he'd immediately change the subject. At first I didn't care. Honestly, I was relieved someone else wanted to deal with that nightmare. Every hour he spent buried in spreadsheets gave me another hour to improve the product. That was our arrangement. Until one afternoon he walked into my office carrying a thick folder and closed the door behind him. He dropped the folder onto my desk with the confidence of someone announcing great news. We need to restructure. I looked up from my screen. Restructure what? The company. I frowned. We literally just finished restructuring 6 months ago. This is different. He pulled out several charts covered in numbers, arrows, and corporate names I'd never seen before. These are tax optimization entities. I have absolutely no idea what that means, he grinned. I know. That's why you have me. He explained it for nearly 20 minutes. At least, he talked for 20 minutes. Whether he actually explained anything is another story. Half the conversation sounded like legal jargon, mixed with accounting vocabulary. Offshore licensing, holding companies, intellectual property allocation, operational entities, consulting subsidiaries. About 5 minutes in, my brain completely checked out. Finally, I interrupted him. So, in normal English? He leaned back in the chair. It saves us millions. And it's legal? Carter, he laughed. I'm not taking us to prison. I laughed too. Now I wish I'd paid attention to what he said next. We'll move certain assets through outside consulting companies. It's cleaner. Investors like cleaner structures. What assets? The patents mostly, I shrugged. If that's what needs to happen. He slid another stack of papers toward me. Just sign these whenever you have time. I picked up the pen automatically. Then my phone rang. It was one of our lead developers calling about a server issue. I'll sign them later. No rush, Nolan said, gathering the papers. Just don't forget. He smiled exactly the way he'd smiled my whole life. Warm, confident, familiar. That smile bought him everything. Around the same time, Aurora started changing too. Not overnight. Slow enough that every individual change seemed harmless. She began spending more evenings out with friends I'd never actually met. Girls' night, wine tasting, shopping, birthday dinner. At first, I encouraged it. I'd been working insane hours and honestly felt guilty about how little time we spent together. If she wanted to relax with friends, who was I to complain? But something felt rehearsed. Every explanation came a second too quickly. Every answer sounded prepared. One Friday, she came home just after midnight, carrying several shopping bags. She kissed my cheek before setting them on the kitchen counter. You should have come. You told me it was girls only. She smiled. It was. Then she disappeared upstairs. I remember looking at the bags. Every single one was empty. I actually laughed to myself. Guess she already unpacked. I didn't think about it again until months later. Another thing changed. She suddenly became fascinated with money, not spending it, understanding it. One evening we were sitting on the couch watching a movie when she muted the television. Can I ask you something? Sure. If, hypothetically, something happened to the company. I looked over. What do you mean? I don't know. Lawsuit, bankruptcy, investors, whatever. Okay. Are the company assets personally under your name? I blinked. What? The patents. No. The intellectual property? The company owns it. What about the office building? We lease it. She nodded thoughtfully. And your personal savings? I laughed. Why are you interviewing me? She smiled. I'm marrying a tech founder. I'm curious. I wrapped an arm around her. You don't need to worry about any of that. I know. She rested her head against my shoulder. I just like knowing our future is safe. Those words should have comforted me. Instead, for reasons I couldn't explain, they stayed in my head. A week later, she asked another question. If someone sued you personally, could they take your house? I stared at her. Where are these questions coming from? I watched a TikTok. I laughed. Seriously? She laughed too. You know how those videos are? Maybe. Or maybe she was collecting information. I just wasn't smart enough to realize it. The first real warning came from something ridiculously small. I was reviewing monthly expenses because our accounting software had flagged a few unusual transactions. Normally, I never looked at that stuff. Nolan handled every dollar that entered or left the company, but our CFO was on vacation, and I happened to be filling in during an internal review. Most expenses looked normal: payroll, cloud infrastructure, software licenses, office rent. Then one line caught my eye: strategic consulting services, $42,000. I didn't recognize the company name. I assumed it was a typo. Then I looked at the previous month: 38,000, the month before that. 41,000, the month before. 36, I scrolled further. The payments had been happening for almost a year. Always around $40,000, always to the same consulting company. Almost $500,000. I searched every shared folder, nothing. No invoices, no reports, no consulting agreements, no deliverables, nothing. I walked straight into Nolan's office, carrying my laptop. He looked up and smiled. What's up? I turned the screen toward him. Who are these people? His smile disappeared. What people? This consulting company. He glanced at the screen for maybe 2 seconds. Oh, who are they? They advise us. On what? He leaned back. Corporate strategy. I've never met them. You don't need to. I've never seen a report. They report to me. I frowned. They've billed almost $500,000. He sighed loudly. Then his entire expression changed. Not angry, offended. Seriously offended. Carter. He slowly stood up. Are you auditing me? No. Then what is this? I'm just asking. No. He shook his head. You're questioning whether I'm stealing from you. I never said that. You didn't have to. The room suddenly felt colder. He walked around his desk until he was standing right in front of me. We've known each other since we were 5. I know. I've handled every legal issue you've ever had. I know. I've protected this company while you hid behind your computer writing code. I appreciate that. And now you're interrogating me over routine business expenses? People outside the glass office walls had started looking over. I lowered my voice. I'm not accusing you. He looked hurt. Not fake hurt, real hurt. At least that's what I believed. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Brother. His voice softened. If you don't trust me anymore, just say it. That sentence hit me like a punch, because the truth was, I did trust him completely, and somehow, he'd managed to make me feel guilty for asking where my own company's money was going, so I apologized. To the man who was robbing me, I actually apologized. I wasn't accusing you, I said quietly. I just didn't recognize the name. Nolan let out a long breath and looked away, like he was trying to calm himself down. I'm sorry, I snapped. He reached over and pulled me into one of those one-armed hugs we'd done since we were kids. I've just been under a ton of pressure, man. Investors are breathing down my neck. Lawyers call me every hour. Tax audits, contract negotiations. You don't see any of it because I make sure you don't have to. I nodded. I know. You build, I protect. Our deal. Our deal. When I walked back to my office, I actually felt ashamed. I convinced myself I'd let success make me paranoid. For the next couple of weeks, I didn't ask another question about money. That was probably exactly what he wanted. The wedding was getting close, and Aurora threw herself into planning like it had become a full-time job. Every evening, there was another florist to meet, another seating chart to rearrange, another tasting appointment, another vendor calling about tiny details I honestly couldn't care less about. She seemed excited on the surface, but something about her smile felt delayed, like she remembered to smile half a second after she was supposed to. One night, she walked into my office at home carrying 2 glasses of wine. You've been working too much. I'm almost done. You always say that. She sat on the edge of my desk and watched me answer emails. After a minute, she asked, almost casually, "Have you updated your will yet?" I stopped typing. My what? The attorney mentioned married couples should. What attorney? The one Nolan recommended. I haven't even talked to him. Oh, she took a sip of wine. I thought you had. I turned toward her. Why are we talking about wills 2 weeks before our wedding? She laughed. God, Carter, relax. I'm just trying to be responsible. Maybe she was. Maybe she wasn't. At the time, I forced myself to believe I was overthinking everything. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye, told me she loved me, and left for another bridal planning lunch. I watched her drive away and couldn't explain why I suddenly felt completely alone inside my own house. 3 days later, I needed a copy of my passport and the vehicle title, because Aurora wanted us to buy a new SUV after the honeymoon. We'd also talked about renting a safety deposit box for some family jewelry my parents planned to give us at the rehearsal dinner. Most of those documents were locked inside the company safe. Normally, Nolan handled everything important that involved paperwork. He always joked that if I were left alone with legal documents, I'd somehow accidentally sell the office building. He wasn't there that afternoon. His calendar showed an investor meeting across town. The receptionist said he probably wouldn't be back until evening. Perfect. I walked into his office, entered the safe combination we'd both shared since the company started, and opened the heavy steel door. The top shelves looked exactly like I expected. Insurance folders, tax binders, employment agreements, property leases. Nothing unusual. I grabbed the envelope with my passport, then noticed something odd. The back wall of the safe wasn't completely flush. There was a narrow gap behind one stack of binders. At first, I thought it was just poor construction. Then I pushed the folders aside. There was another compartment, a hidden one. I stared at it for a second. Nolan? I actually smiled. You're ridiculous. I assumed he'd hidden birthday gifts or cash for emergencies. Instead, there was a thin black folder with no label. Just one. I pulled it out. It felt heavier than it looked. The first page was covered in legal language. I almost put it back. Then one phrase caught my eye. Assignment of intellectual property rights. My stomach tightened. I turned the page. Then another. Then another. Every page made less sense than the one before. Company assets, patent transfers, licensing rights, software ownership. Then I reached the signature pages. That's when everything inside me seemed to stop. My name was there. My signature was there too. Except I had absolutely no memory of signing those documents. I looked closer. The patents for the software I'd spent years creating had been transferred months earlier to another company. Not ours, a completely different corporation. I flipped to the ownership records. One shareholder, one director, one beneficiary, Nolan Hayes. I actually laughed, not because anything was funny, because my brain refused to process what my eyes were reading. No, I whispered. No, that's impossible. I checked the next document, the trademarks, transferred. The licensing agreements, transferred. Future royalty rights, transferred. Core technology assets, transferred. It was all there, page after page after page. Every single thing that gave our company value had quietly been moved somewhere else. I kept searching for an explanation, some amendment, some note, anything. Instead, I found emails printed and attached behind several agreements. Outside legal counsel, tax advisors, registration confirmations. Everything had been executed months ago, without me ever realizing it. My hands had started shaking so badly, the papers slipped onto the floor. I dropped to my knees to gather them, but I couldn't stop staring at the signatures. Mine looked real. Perfectly real. Too real. Had I signed them? Had Nolan buried them inside one of those 100-page document packages I'd signed without reading? Or had someone signed for me? I didn't know. And that uncertainty scared me even more than the documents themselves. Because if I'd actually signed them, then legally, I might have handed away my entire life's work with my own pen. I stuffed every page back into the folder exactly the way I'd found it, took several photos with my phone, returned the folder to the hidden compartment, closed the safe, locked it, then sat down in Nolan's chair. I couldn't hear the air conditioner anymore, couldn't hear people talking outside, couldn't hear my own breathing. There was only one thought repeating over and over inside my head. If this is real, then nothing in my life is what I think it is. I don't know how long I sat there. 5 minutes? Maybe 30. Time stopped making sense. I kept unlocking my phone, opening the photos I'd taken, zooming in on the signatures, then locking it again like somehow the words would change the next time I looked. They never did. The transfer dates were real. The registration numbers were real. Nolan's name was everywhere. Mine only appeared where someone needed my signature. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. Some complicated corporate structure, some tax strategy I simply didn't understand. Because the alternative meant my best friend had been planning this for months, maybe longer. I finally stood up, splashed cold water on my face in the restroom, and forced myself to act normal. No one in the office could know what I'd found, especially Nolan. If he was innocent, I'd look insane. If he was guilty, the second he realized I knew, he'd move faster than I could. When I got home that evening, Aurora was already there. She was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through wedding decorations on her tablet. She looked up with the same smile she'd greeted me with hundreds of times. "Hey. Hey." She walked over, kissed me, then immediately noticed something. "You okay?" "Long day." She studied my face for a second. "You look pale." "I'm fine." "You sure?" I nodded. She wrapped her arms around me. For just a second, I almost broke. I almost told her everything. I almost handed her my phone and said, "Please explain this." Instead, I hugged her back, because one thought suddenly hit me. If Nolan really was behind this, who else knew? That question refused to leave my head. That night, Aurora fell asleep almost immediately. I couldn't. Around 2 in the morning, I quietly climbed out of bed and walked downstairs. The house was silent, except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands were still shaking. I opened my laptop. The transfer documents, the dates, the registration numbers. I started searching public corporate records. Most of the companies listed were shell corporations, empty office addresses, virtual mailboxes, registered agents. Layers upon layers of paperwork. Whoever built this structure knew exactly what they were doing. Then I found one detail. The consulting company. The same one I'd questioned Nolan about. The one receiving $40,000 every month. Its registered mailing address matched one of the shell companies that now supposedly owned my patents. I leaned back slowly. That wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. The money leaving our company was going to companies connected to the people who now claimed ownership of my work. For the first time, I stopped trying to convince myself I was paranoid. Someone was stealing from me. The only question left was, how many people were involved? The next morning, I watched Aurora more carefully than I ever had before. Not obviously, just paying attention. Things I'd ignored before suddenly stood out. She kept her phone face down. Always. Every notification was silenced. Whenever she replied to messages, she'd angle the screen away without even realizing she was doing it. When I entered the room, unexpectedly, she'd lock it almost instantly. Had she always done that? Or had I simply never noticed? I honestly couldn't tell anymore. Paranoia is a dangerous thing. Once it starts, every tiny detail feels like evidence. By lunchtime, I hated myself. Maybe I was turning into one of those jealous, suspicious people who destroy their own relationships because they can't trust anyone. Maybe I was seeing ghosts. Then something happened that changed everything. Aurora called me while she thought she was calling someone else. I answered. "Hey." Silence. Then I heard her voice. No, he hasn't said anything. Another voice answered, a man's voice, too muffled to recognize. She kept talking. I told you, he's completely focused on work. My heart started pounding. The man replied again, still too quiet. Then Aurora laughed. Not the laugh she used with me, a different one, lower, comfortable, almost intimate. Finally, she realized the call was connected. Carter? I froze. Yeah. How long have you been there? The whole time. A pause. Oh my God. She laughed awkwardly. I butt dialed you. Who were you talking to? My cousin. I didn't know your cousin was a guy. Another tiny pause. He isn't. So, whose voice was that? The waiter. The waiter? Yeah. Another pause. He was asking if we wanted dessert. Something about the timing, the hesitation. The way she answered, none of it felt right, but I couldn't prove anything. I'm sorry, she said. I'll call you later. The line disconnected. I sat staring at my phone for almost a minute. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe she wasn't. I no longer knew what truth even sounded like. 2 days later, fate handed me something I never would have found on my own. Aurora came by the office after lunch because we were supposed to meet a wedding planner. She rushed inside carrying 3 garment bags. I'm running late. She kissed me quickly. We have to leave in 10 minutes. She set her purse on my desk while she went to the restroom. Her phone buzzed once, twice. 3 times I ignored it. Then the screen lit up again. The phone wasn't locked. A message preview appeared. N. Don't text me while you're with him. Every muscle in my body froze. Another message arrived. Before the screen went dark. We only need 2 more weeks. N. Nolan. Maybe another N. Maybe not. I stood there staring at the phone. My brain screamed at me not to touch it. Another part of me whispered, if you don't look now, you'll never know. My hand hovered over the phone for what felt like forever. I kept hearing my own voice inside my head. Don't do it. If you open it, there's no going back. If she's innocent, you'll destroy everything. If she's guilty, everything is already destroyed. I picked it up. The screen was still unlocked. She must have been replying to messages before she rushed into my office. I tapped the notification. Nothing happened. Face ID failed because it had timed out. I quietly put the phone back exactly where it had been. Then I heard the restroom door open. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. Aurora walked back into the office smiling. Ready? I looked at her, really looked at her. Same eyes, same smile, same woman I'd imagined spending the rest of my life with. And for the first time, I wondered if I had ever actually known her. Yeah, I said, I'm ready. The entire drive she talked about flowers, guest seating, the honeymoon, the photographer. I answered automatically. My brain wasn't even in the car. It was stuck on 2 messages. Don't text me while you're with him. We only need 2 more weeks. 2 weeks. Our wedding was scheduled. In exactly 2 weeks. That couldn't be a coincidence. Or maybe I was forcing pieces together that didn't belong. By the time we got home, I'd made one decision. I wasn't confronting either of them. Not yet. I needed facts, not feelings. That night, after Aurora fell asleep, I remembered something I'd completely forgotten. About a year earlier, we'd switched phones. When she upgraded, she'd asked me to help transfer everything into our shared cloud storage because she was afraid of losing old photos. Her previous phone had never been traded in. It was sitting somewhere in the house. I quietly slipped out of bed and started checking closets. Nothing. The guest room. Nothing. Then I opened a storage cabinet in the garage. There it was, an old white phone inside its original box. Dust covered the screen. I almost laughed. I hope you still work. I carried it into my office and plugged it into a charger. For several minutes, nothing. Then the Apple logo appeared. My pulse immediately sped up. The phone powered on. No passcode. Apparently she'd wiped some things before putting it away. But not everything, because the cloud account automatically began syncing. Photos, contacts, messages, notes. I wasn't looking for anything specific anymore. I was just praying I was wrong. The sync finished. I opened messages. Most conversations were exactly what you'd expect. Her mom, friends, co-workers, wedding vendors. Then, one conversation had no name, only a phone number, thousands of messages. I tapped it. The first message loaded, then another, then another. My stomach dropped. The number had eventually been saved months later. The contact name appeared, Nolan. I stopped breathing. The oldest messages looked innocent. Work jokes, memes, planning surprise birthday gifts for me. Then, somewhere around 18 months earlier, everything changed. Nolan. He's still at the office? Aurora. Yeah. Probably until midnight. Nolan. Perfect. I kept scrolling. Aurora. Sometimes I almost feel guilty. Nolan. Don't. He'll survive. Another week, another conversation. Aurora. He thinks I was shopping. Nolan. Good, keep it that way. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped the phone. I kept reading. The messages became more personal, then intimate, then impossible to misunderstand. Photos, videos, voice messages, hotel reservations, inside jokes that only two people sleeping together would have. I felt something inside my chest physically tighten, not metaphorically, literally. It became difficult to breathe. I stood up too fast and nearly knocked over the chair. No, I whispered, no. I wanted one message, just one. Something proving this wasn't what it looked like. Instead, I found hundreds, a year and a half, while I was building the company, while I was choosing engagement rings, while we were touring wedding venues, while Nolan stood beside me as my best man. They were sleeping together. The room suddenly felt too small. I walked to the window and pressed both hands against the glass. The cold helped, barely. After several minutes, I forced myself back to the desk. If I stopped now, I'd never know how deep this went. I scrolled closer to the present. The conversations became less romantic and more strategic. Nolan. The transfers are almost finished. Aurora. Does he suspect anything? Nolan. He's starting to ask questions. Handle him. Aurora. Leave that to me. I felt sick. Actually sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. When I came back, I kept reading. Because pain is strange. Once you've been stabbed, your brain almost wants to know how much worse it can get. Then I reached the messages from 3 nights earlier. Aurora. After the wedding? Nolan. There won't be a wedding. Aurora. Are you sure? Nolan. Positive. The lawsuits hit first. Aurora. And his money? Nolan. What's left after legal fees comes through the holding company. The patents are already ours. Aurora. Will he fight? Nolan. With what? By the time he realizes what's happened, he'll be broke. Then came the message I'll never forget. Nolan. In 2 weeks he'll lose his company, his fiancée, and every dollar he thinks he owns. Aurora answered only 6 words. He'll never see it coming. I stared at those words until sunrise. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't punch the wall. Because in that moment, I understood something terrifying. If I confronted them now, I'd lose. Legally, they already believed they had won. So I did the only thing I could. I started planning a war they would never see coming. The sun was coming up when I finally closed the phone. Birds were chirping outside my office window. People were getting ready for work. Somewhere across town, Nolan was probably making coffee. Aurora was asleep upstairs, and my entire life had just been reduced to evidence. I sat there for another hour without moving. The strange thing about betrayal is that your brain doesn't process it all at once. It protects you. It gives you tiny pieces, because the full weight would crush you instantly. First came the affair, then the shell companies, then the fake consulting fees, then the stolen patents, then the messages, then the realization that every hug, every joke, every wedding appointment during the last 18 months had happened while they were secretly planning to destroy me. I picked up my phone. Not to call either of them. To call someone neither of them knew existed. About 3 years earlier, one of our investors had introduced me to a corporate attorney after a licensing dispute with another startup. We only spoke twice, but I remembered one thing he said before leaving the meeting. If anyone ever tells you not to involve a lawyer because they're your friend, call me first. I searched my contacts, found his number. It was barely after 7 in the morning. I hesitated, then pressed call. He answered on the third ring. This is Michael Grant. Mr. Grant, my name is Carter Reynolds. A short pause. The software engineer? You remember me? I remember winning your case. I swallowed. I think I need help. His voice immediately changed. What happened? I looked toward the ceiling. Aurora was still asleep upstairs. I don't think I can explain over the phone. Another pause. Can you be in my office in an hour? Yes. Bring every document you have. I will. And Carter, don't tell anyone you're coming. I won't. He disconnected. Exactly 1 hour later, I walked into his downtown office, carrying a backpack full of printed photos, copies of corporate filings, screenshots of messages, and every document I'd managed to photograph from the safe. Michael didn't interrupt me once. For almost 2 hours I talked. From kindergarten, to Nolan, to Aurora, to the shell companies, to the hidden folder, to the messages I'd read before sunrise. When I finally stopped, the room stayed completely silent. Michael slowly removed his glasses, then asked one question. Have either of them realized you know? No. Good. He leaned back. Keep it that way. I waited. He picked up one of the transfer agreements and examined the signature page under a desk lamp. What? This signature bothers me. Mine? Yes. Why? He slid the page toward me. Look closely. I couldn't see anything unusual. It looks identical. Exactly, I frowned. What does that mean? He smiled slightly. Nobody signs their name identically every single time. He opened another document, then another, then another. He placed 6 signature pages side by side. Every signature looked perfect, too perfect. Michael tapped the table. Human signatures always contain tiny variations. I leaned closer. He was right. The signatures on my driver's license, my passport, our incorporation papers, all had tiny differences, pressure, spacing, curves, but every signature on the patent transfer documents matched almost perfectly, pixel for pixel. I looked up. You think? I don't think. He interrupted me. I verify. He reached for his phone. I know one of the best forensic document examiners in the state. He looked directly at me. If these were digitally forged, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. My heartbeat suddenly became so loud I could barely hear him. But that's only part of the problem. What do you mean? He spread the remaining documents across the table. Even if we prove forgery, they've already moved the intellectual property. So what? So recovering it isn't automatic. I felt my stomach sink again. There has to be something. There might be. He turned another page, then suddenly stopped. Huh? What? He smiled for the first time that morning. This, he tapped one paragraph, is interesting. I leaned over the desk. What? Your friend got greedy. I don't understand. Michael pointed toward the patent registration dates. When did you start developing this software? Almost 2 years before the company existed. And do you still have the original source code? Of course. The original backups? Every version? The development logs? I never delete anything. He looked at me with an expression I still remember. Carter, who owns your home server? I do. Personally? Yes. His smile became wider. And where are the oldest builds stored? My server. When were they created? Long before the company. He slowly closed the folder. I think your best friend just made the biggest mistake of his life. I stared at him. I don't follow. He transferred patents that may never have legally belonged to the company in the first place. I blinked. What? You created the core technology before incorporation. Yes. Did you ever execute a valid intellectual property assignment, transferring your pre-existing code to the company? I, I stopped. I honestly didn't know. Michael nodded. I thought so. He opened his notebook. If no valid assignment exists, then he didn't steal company property. He stole your personal intellectual property. The room went completely silent. And that's a felony? I asked quietly. Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he smiled. It could be several felonies. For the first time in almost 48 hours, I felt something other than panic. Hope. Not the kind that makes you celebrate. The dangerous kind. The kind that whispers, "They're not untouchable." Michael wasn't celebrating either. If anything, he became even more serious. Listen to me very carefully. I nodded. From this point forward, you do absolutely nothing without talking to me first. Okay. You don't confront Nolan? I won't. You don't confront Aurora? I won't. You don't move money? I won't. You don't even change a password unless I tell you to. I understand. He closed the folders. Because the second they realize you've discovered this, he tapped the table. They'll start destroying evidence. That sentence stayed with me all day. Destroying evidence. If Nolan had planned this for over a year, he probably had backup plans too. I asked Michael the question that had been haunting me since the night before. What if I'm already too late? He looked at me without blinking. You're not. How can you be sure? Because people like Nolan always believe they're smarter than everyone else. He leaned forward. And overconfidence makes people careless. He was right. Nolan had hidden the documents inside a safe I could access. He'd left shell companies connected through public filings. He'd assumed I'd never question him. That arrogance might be the only reason I still had a chance. Before I left, Michael handed me a business card. The name printed underneath caught my attention. Ethan Brooks, licensed private investigator. Who's this? The best investigator I've worked with. What do I tell him? The truth. That afternoon, I met Ethan in a small office above an old bookstore. Nothing about him looked like the private investigators you see in movies. No trench coat, no sunglasses, just jeans, a gray polo shirt, and a notebook that already had my name written across the top before I even sat down. He listened with the same patience Michael had. Only he interrupted once. When did the affair start? 18 months ago. You know that for sure? The messages. Good. When did the financial transfers begin? Around the same time. He nodded slowly. Interesting. Why? In my experience, he flipped through his notes. People don't usually start stealing from business partners after an affair. I frowned. What do you mean? The affair usually starts because the fraud already exists. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. So, I swallowed. You think this wasn't spontaneous? He looked at me. I think you should prepare yourself for the possibility that both relationships were being manipulated long before you noticed anything. I stared at the floor. I didn't want to ask the next question, but I had to. You think Aurora was with me because of the company? He didn't answer. Not directly. I don't deal in guesses. I deal in evidence. I'll find out. For the next 2 weeks, my life became a performance. Every morning, I kissed Aurora goodbye. Every afternoon, I sat across from Nolan in meetings. Every evening, we talked about wedding plans, cake flavors, music, guest lists, flower arrangements. I smiled, I laughed, I acted exactly like the man they believed I still was. Inside, I was documenting everything. Michael had me make forensic copies of every development server I'd ever owned, every code repository, every backup drive, every email, every design notebook, even the handwritten sketches I'd made years before the company existed. It turned out I'd accidentally done something incredibly important years earlier. Whenever I finished a major software milestone, I'd emailed a compressed backup to myself. Mostly because I was paranoid about hard drive failures. Those emails contained automatic timestamps dating back almost 2 years before the company was incorporated. Michael nearly laughed when he saw them. They just proved independent creation. Every old backup became another brick in the wall we were building. Meanwhile, Ethan quietly went to work. He never called unless he had something concrete. 4 days later, my phone buzzed. "I need you to see something." We met inside his office. He slid several photographs across the desk. The first showed Nolan entering a downtown hotel. The second showed Aurora arriving 15 minutes later. The third showed them leaving together the next morning. No room for excuses. No misunderstanding. No, just friends. Just reality. "I figured you'd want confirmation," Ethan said quietly. I nodded. I couldn't even speak. Then he pushed another folder toward me. "This matters more." Inside were corporate records, bank transfers, property searches. One document immediately caught my eye: the consulting company. Its registered owner wasn't Nolan, it was another shell corporation, owned by Aurora. I looked up. "What?" Ethan nodded. "She isn't just involved." He tapped the paperwork. "She's a financial beneficiary." I felt my chest tighten again. So every payment ultimately benefited both of them. My hands slowly curled into fists. They've been stealing together. For over a year. I looked back down, then noticed another document, a draft purchase agreement. "What is this?" Ethan answered immediately. "A house." I frowned. "They're buying a house?" They were trying to. The buyers listed on the contract were Nolan Hayes, Aurora Mitchell, joint purchasers, closing date 3 days after my wedding. No, not after my wedding, 3 days after the wedding. They never intended to happen. The deposit amount alone was almost exactly equal to the money that had disappeared through the fake consulting company. I couldn't stop staring at it. They weren't planning a future. They were already building one, using my money, using my company, using my life. Ethan quietly closed the folder. "I've investigated fraud for almost 20 years. I looked at him. "I've learned one thing." "What?" "The affair wasn't the real betrayal." I frowned. "The real betrayal." He rested a finger on the consulting invoices. "Started the day they looked at your success and decided it belonged to them." For several seconds, neither of us said a word. Then my phone vibrated. Incoming call. "Nolan." I looked at Ethan. He nodded once. "Answer it." I took a slow breath and accepted the call. "Hey, brother." Nolan sounded happier than ever. "Guess what?" "What?" "I've got amazing news." I forced a laugh. "Better than our international contract?" "Oh yeah, you'll love this." I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. "What is it?" "Tomorrow morning," he said excitedly. "I just need one last signature from you." I closed my eyes for half a second. One last signature, of course. That explained why they hadn't made their final move yet. Whatever was sitting in that folder tomorrow morning, they still needed me to authorize something. Maybe they'd become greedy. Maybe one document was impossible to fake. Either way, for the first time since this nightmare began, I knew something they didn't. I knew the trap hadn't closed yet. I smiled into the phone. "Sure, what am I signing?" "Oh, nothing exciting." Nolan laughed. "Just cleaning up some paperwork before the wedding. Tax stuff? You know me. I'll stop by in the morning." "Perfect." His voice became lighter. "And hey, I'm proud of you, man. We've built something incredible." I nearly crushed the phone. I swallowed. "We really did." He hung up. For a few seconds, neither Ethan nor I spoke. Then he looked at me. "He's nervous." "You think so? People don't suddenly need one last signature unless they're trying to finish something." I looked at the phone. "So what do we do?" "We let him believe he still controls the game." The next morning, Michael, Ethan, and I met before sunrise. Michael already had a legal pad filled with notes. I've drafted temporary injunction paperwork. I frowned. So we file today? He shook his head. Not yet. Why? Because I don't just want fraud. He looked straight at me. I want attempted fraud while they're still actively committing it. The plan sounded almost insane. I'd go to the office exactly like every other day, wear my normal clothes, drink coffee with Nolan, smile, listen. If he presented documents, I'd ask ordinary questions. I'd never refuse outright. I'd simply say I wanted to read everything carefully because marriage had made me more responsible. Michael actually smiled when he said that. The man who's never read a contract suddenly wants to read one. Exactly. If he's guilty, he'll panic. And if he's innocent, then you've simply become a smarter businessman. For the first time in weeks, I walked into the office feeling something close to confidence. Nolan was already waiting. He had breakfast sitting on my desk. Coffee, bagels, the exact blueberry muffin I'd ordered almost every Friday for years. He stood up smiling. My man. He pulled me into another hug. It felt disgusting. Wedding countdown. Can't believe it's almost here. I know. He handed me the coffee. You nervous? A little, he laughed. That's normal. For 20 minutes, we talked about absolutely nothing. Football, vacation plans, an investor conference. It almost felt like the old days. Almost. Then he opened his briefcase. There it is, a thick blue folder. I know paperwork isn't your favorite thing, but we should finish this before the honeymoon. He slid it toward me. I opened the first page, corporate restructuring, licensing adjustments, administrative amendments. Exactly the kind of language that used to make my eyes glaze over. Not today. I slowly turned each page. Nolan watched me. At first he looked relaxed, then less relaxed. You've never actually read these before. I smiled. I figured maybe it's time I start acting like an adult. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Fair enough. I kept reading, page after page, then I found it. Buried almost 80 pages into the packet. A permanent assignment of all future derivative works, software improvements, source code updates, and related intellectual property to the holding company, not our company, the shell company, the one owned by Nolan. If I'd signed, every line of code I wrote for the rest of my life would legally belong to him. I looked up casually. This paragraph's kind of confusing. He leaned over immediately. Oh, that's standard. What does future derivative works mean? It just protects us. Us? Yeah. I pretended to think about it. He smiled. Don't overthink it. I'd still like Michael to look at it. The smile disappeared. What? My attorney. His eyes narrowed almost invisibly. You hired an attorney? Yeah, he laughed. Since when? Wedding planning made me realize I should probably understand what I'm signing. Silence, real silence. Then he leaned back. Carter. His voice became softer. You don't trust me? There it was again. The same weapon. Guilt. Only this time, it didn't work. I shrugged. I trust you, but I also trust seatbelts. He forced a smile. Come on, it's just paperwork. I'm sure it is. So, sign it. I'll sign it after my lawyer reads it. For the first time in 18 years, I watched Nolan completely lose control of his expression. It lasted maybe 1 second. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened, a vein appeared along his neck. Then, the smile returned. Too quickly, too perfectly. Of course, he closed the folder. No rush. But I already knew he was terrified, because for the first time, his favorite weapon had stopped working. Blind trust was gone, and without it, his entire plan was starting to collapse. That afternoon, Michael called. I've seen enough. What do you mean? The signature packet. Yeah? He took a deep breath. We're done waiting. Already? Carter, I just received the forensic report. My heartbeat doubled. And the signatures on the patent transfers are digitally fabricated. I closed my eyes. So it wasn't me. No, it was never you. And that's not even the biggest news. I sat down slowly. What else? Michael spoke one sentence that changed everything. The district attorney's financial crimes unit wants to meet tomorrow morning. The next morning, I walked into Michael's office expecting a normal meeting. Instead, there were 6 people waiting: Michael, Ethan, a forensic accountant, the document examiner, and 2 investigators from the financial crimes unit. Nobody shook my hand. Nobody smiled. The atmosphere was completely different from every meeting I'd had during the previous 2 weeks. One of the investigators opened a notebook. "Mr. Reynolds, we've reviewed the preliminary evidence." He slid several photographs across the table, copies of the forged signatures, bank transfers, corporate registrations, the shell company structure, the hotel surveillance, and the consulting payments. Everything I'd spent 2 weeks collecting was laid out before me. He looked directly at me. "If this evidence is authentic, then your business partner has committed multiple criminal offenses." I swallowed. "What happens now? We don't arrest him today." I frowned. "I thought that's why we're here." The investigator shook his head. "No, we arrest him when we know exactly where every dollar went." That made sense. A rushed arrest could leave millions hidden forever. The forensic accountant spoke next. "We've traced approximately $870,000 through the consulting company." I blinked. 870? The transfers increased during the last several months. I stared at the spreadsheet. I'd only found the first few payments. They'd become greedier after I'd stopped checking. The accountant continued. "Most of the money ultimately ended up funding one real estate purchase and several investment accounts." Michael looked at me. "Here's the interesting part." I waited. "They haven't moved everything yet." "What do you mean?" "The largest client payment from your international contract is scheduled to arrive next Monday. Almost $4 million. My stomach tightened. If Nolan gained control of that payment, he'd disappear. The investigator closed the file. "So we have one objective, which is, we let him believe he's won." That afternoon, I quietly did something Nolan never expected. I logged into the infrastructure that only I controlled. Most people assumed the company's servers belonged to the company. They didn't. Years earlier, before incorporation, I'd built the entire back end on hardware, sitting in a climate-controlled room beneath my house. As the company grew, we added cloud infrastructure, but the authentication system, the deployment keys, and the master encryption certificates all originated from my private development server. Nobody questioned it, because nobody besides me understood how the architecture actually worked, including Nolan. Michael had warned me not to touch anything until he approved it. Now he finally nodded. "Do it." I didn't delete anything. That would have been illegal. I simply revoked every deployment certificate, linked to the shell company's infrastructure, redirected incoming authentication requests to a protected mirror environment, and froze any future software updates unless they were signed with my personal developer key. To every client in the world, the platform kept running perfectly. To Nolan, everything appeared normal. But if he tried selling, licensing, or transferring his software, he'd discover he couldn't update, maintain, or legally authenticate a single line of it. The heart of the system still answered to me. When I finished, Michael smiled. "You just took away the only thing he actually wanted." "The code." "No." He shook his head. "Control." For the next 4 days, I became an actor. Aurora asked if we should upgrade our honeymoon suite. I smiled. "Absolutely." She showed me wedding photos. I complimented every dress. She asked whether I'd finished signing the remaining paperwork. I told her Michael was almost done reviewing it. Every single time I mentioned my lawyer, I noticed the same reaction, a tiny hesitation, a glance toward her phone, a little less confidence than the day before. Meanwhile, Ethan kept watching both of them. His reports became more frantic, longer meetings, more hotel visits, late-night conversations. Nolan visited 2 different banks. Aurora met with a real estate attorney. They were accelerating because they knew something had changed. They just didn't know what. The rehearsal dinner arrived on Friday evening. Both families were there. My parents, Aurora's parents, her younger sister, my uncle, close friends, and even a few early investors who'd become almost like family. Nolan walked in carrying 2 expensive bottles of wine. He hugged my father, shook everyone's hand, and made the whole room laugh within 5 minutes. Watching him work a room was almost fascinating. He looked exactly like an innocent man. Aurora looked beautiful. That hurt more than anything, because even after everything, some stupid part of me still remembered the girl outside that coffee shop years ago. I kept asking myself whether she'd ever been real, or whether I'd simply fallen in love with a role she'd been playing. Halfway through dinner, Nolan stood and lifted his glass. "I'd like to make a toast." Everyone quieted. He looked at me. "I've known Carter since kindergarten." People smiled. "My brother." He actually sounded emotional. "I couldn't be prouder of the man you've become." My mother wiped away a tear. He continued, "Tomorrow your life begins." I looked at Michael, who was sitting quietly near the end of the table as my family attorney. He gave me the smallest nod. It was time. I stood before Nolan could finish. "I actually have something first." The room became silent. Aurora looked confused. "Carter?" I reached beside my chair, picked up 2 thick folders, and placed them carefully on the center of the table. Nobody understood what they were. Yet. I looked directly at Nolan, then at Aurora. Neither of them smiled anymore. The room was so quiet, I could hear silverware clinking somewhere in the kitchen. Everyone was looking at me. My dad frowned. "Carter?" Aurora reached for my hand. "What's wrong?" I gently pulled my hand away. That tiny movement changed everything. Her smile disappeared. Nolan looked from me to the folders, then back to me. "What is this?" I took a slow breath. For 2 weeks, I'd imagined this moment 100 different ways. I'd imagined screaming, throwing punches, or flipping the table. Instead, I felt strangely calm. I slid the first folder toward Nolan. "This one's for you." He looked confused. "What's in it?" "Open it." He laughed nervously. "What is this, some kind of joke?" "Open it." The room stayed silent. Finally, he reached forward and opened the folder. The first page was the forensic report, proving the digital signatures had been fabricated. The second was the financial tracing report. The third listed every shell company. The fourth contained copies of the patent transfers. Behind those sat a letter addressed to the Financial Crimes Unit, and clipped to the front was a warrant application already prepared by the investigators. I watched the color drain from his face. Not slowly, instantly. It was like someone had unplugged him. He stopped breathing for a second. His eyes raced across the pages. Then he looked at me. "Carter." His voice barely came out. "What the hell is this?" "The truth." He shook his head. "No." He started flipping pages faster. "No, no." Aurora looked between us. "What are you talking about?" I picked up the second folder. "This one's yours." She stared at it. "I don't understand." "I know, you will." She opened it. The very first page contained a printed photograph of her walking into the downtown hotel with Nolan behind her. The next page showed them leaving together the following morning. Then another. Then another. Hotel after hotel. Month after month. Behind the photographs were screenshots of thousands of messages and highlighted conversations containing the 6 words I'd read over and over until I could recite them from memory. "He'll never see it coming." She stopped turning pages. Both hands began shaking. "No." Her voice cracked. "No." Her mother leaned closer. "Aurora?" She slammed the folder shut. "These aren't real." I calmly slid my phone across the table. "The originals are backed up." She didn't touch it. Nolan suddenly stood up. "This is insane." He looked around the room. "He's been manipulated." I almost smiled. "By who?" "You." He pointed directly at Michael. "This attorney." Michael calmly stood. "I'm Michael Grant." He handed Nolan a business card. "Counsel for Mr. Reynolds and former federal prosecutor." Nolan's face somehow became even paler. My father looked completely lost. "Carter, what is happening?" I finally looked at everyone else. "I'm sorry. I'm steady. I wanted all of you here because I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life explaining pieces of this story, one person at a time." I turned toward Nolan. "The consulting company." Silence. "The shell corporations." Silence. "The forged signatures." Nothing. "The patent transfers." Still nothing. Finally, I looked directly into his eyes. "You stole my company." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Aurora suddenly burst into tears. "Carter, I can explain." I looked at her. "No. You deserve to hear." "I've already read it." Her face froze. "The messages." Every bit of color disappeared. You read them?" "Every single one." She actually stumbled backward. Her chair tipped over onto the floor. Her father stood. "What messages?" Nobody answered. I picked up several printed screenshots and quietly handed them to him. He read the first one, then another, then another. His hands started trembling. He looked at his daughter as if he didn't recognize her. "You..." His voice broke. "Is this real?" Aurora couldn't answer. She just cried harder. Nolan suddenly slammed both hands onto the table. "This isn't all on us." Everyone jumped. He pointed directly at me. "He signed the documents," Michael calmly interrupted. "No." He placed another report on the table. "Your digital forgery software did." Silence. Absolute silence. The forensic examiner, who had quietly entered the dining room with the investigators a few moments earlier, stepped forward. "We compared every signature." He looked at Nolan. "They're mathematically identical." He paused. "Human beings don't sign that way." Nolan finally understood. There was no way out. Not this time. He slowly sat back down. His shoulders collapsed. For the first time since I was 5 years old, he looked small. One of the investigators stepped forward. "Mr. Hayes." Nolan didn't move. "We'd like you to come with us." Aurora looked up in panic. "What? This isn't happening." The investigator spoke calmly. "You are not under arrest at this moment." He looked directly at Nolan. "But you are the subject of an active criminal investigation involving fraud, forgery, wire fraud, conspiracy, and theft of intellectual property." Every person at the table looked completely stunned. My mother quietly started crying, not because of the company, but because she'd loved Nolan almost like another son. He slowly stood, then he looked at me. Not angry, not scared, just empty. "I really did love you like a brother." I held his gaze. "So did I." The investigators escorted him toward the door. He never looked back. Aurora suddenly ran toward me. "Carter, please." I stepped away before she could touch me. "Don't." She broke down completely. "I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I couldn't stop myself from laughing. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary." I pointed toward the folders. "That took 18 months. She covered her face. "I loved you." I looked at her for several seconds, then quietly answered, "No, you loved what I was building." She collapsed into a chair, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Her parents didn't comfort her. Neither did her sister. No one moved. Because there are moments when the truth is so overwhelming that nobody knows what kindness is supposed to look like anymore. 3 months later, the wedding venue hosted someone else's reception. The deposits I recovered covered most of the cancellation costs. Michael and his team unwound the fraudulent transfers one by one. Because the original technology had been created years before the company existed, and because the signatures had been forged, the court restored every patent and every major asset to me. The shell companies were frozen. The stolen funds were traced, seized where possible, and tied directly to the criminal case. I shut down the old corporate structure completely. The company came back under a new name, a new board, and mandatory outside audits. No single person, not even me, could ever move critical assets alone again. People sometimes ask whether I regret trusting Nolan. I do, but I regret trusting him without verification even more. Friendship is not internal control. Love is not due diligence. The people who truly care about you won't be offended by transparency. Today, the company is stronger than it has ever been. As for Nolan and Aurora, they stayed together for a while, long enough to discover that relationships built on betrayal usually collapse under the weight of blame. Between legal fees, frozen assets, debt, and civil lawsuits, they lost the future they'd spent 18 months trying to steal. The last lesson this taught me wasn't about business. It was about people. Never hand someone complete control over your finances just because they call you brother. And never mistake the absence of questions for the presence of trust. Real partners don't fear an audit. Only people with something to hide do. The criminal case stretched on for almost 11 months. Movies make you believe justice happens in one dramatic courtroom speech. It doesn't. Real life is paperwork, depositions, forensic reports, and financial tracing. It involves endless meetings where people argue over emails, timestamps, server logs, digital certificates, and corporate filings. Sometimes I'd spend 8 hours answering questions about a single document I'd signed 4 years earlier. Other days, I'd sit in silence while accountants explained how money had traveled through 6 different shell companies before ending up in accounts controlled by Nolan and Aurora. The deeper investigators dug, the worse it became. The fake consulting company had never employed a single consultant. The invoices had been generated automatically. The reports submitted to our accounting department were copied from publicly available business articles with different company names pasted over the originals. One forensic analyst actually laughed during testimony. "I've seen lazy fraud before." He looked at the judge. "But this may be the laziest $1 million fraud I've ever examined." The courtroom didn't laugh because nobody found it funny anymore. When Nolan finally took the stand, I almost didn't recognize him. The expensive suits were gone. The confidence was gone. The perfect smile that used to charm investors had disappeared. He looked exhausted, older, and smaller. His attorney tried arguing that I'd voluntarily signed every transfer. Then Michael quietly displayed the forensic animation, comparing my real signatures with the forged digital overlays. Even without legal training, everyone in the courtroom could see it. The signatures on the fraudulent documents were mathematically identical. Mine never were. No human signature is. That single presentation destroyed almost their entire defense. Then came the source code evidence. Every version of the software, every development snapshot, and every backup email I'd sent to myself years before the company even existed. Every timestamp proved exactly the same thing. I had created the technology long before the business was formed. The intellectual property had originated with me. The attempted transfers weren't just unethical, they were illegal. By the time the verdicts were announced, the outcome no longer surprised anyone. The shell companies were dissolved. The fraudulent transfers were voided. The remaining stolen assets were seized. Civil judgments followed the criminal findings, and most of what could legally be recovered eventually returned to the company. Nolan avoided looking at me until the very end. As deputies prepared to escort him away, he finally turned. I would have shared everything. His voice barely sounded like the man I'd grown up with. "You should have trusted me." For a second, I almost answered. Then I realized there was nothing left to say. You can't explain loyalty to someone who spent 18 months calculating its price. Aurora testified too. She cried, she apologized, and she claimed Nolan manipulated her. Then investigators presented bank records showing she'd been a registered owner of one of the shell corporations months before the affair even became physical. The timeline spoke louder than any apology. She wasn't dragged into the scheme. She had helped build it. After everything ended, I drove past the wedding venue one afternoon. Someone else's reception was taking place. People were dancing, kids were running across the lawn, and a bride laughed as photographers chased her toward the gardens. I parked across the street for a few minutes, not because I missed Aurora, but because I wanted to make sure I didn't hate that place anymore. Surprisingly, I didn't. That wedding had never belonged to me. It belonged to two people who never actually existed. The woman I loved and the brother I trusted were memories I'd created from people who'd been pretending for a very long time. 6 months later, I reopened the company under a completely different name. The software survived. Most of the employees stayed because they discovered the truth before rumors could destroy us. Some of our biggest clients actually expanded their contracts after learning what had happened. One CEO told me something I'll never forget. If your own technology survived betrayal like this, he smiled, it'll survive anything. Today, the company is bigger than it ever was before. Not because I'm smarter and not because I work harder. It is because I finally stopped believing trust is a business strategy. Every financial decision now requires multiple approvals. Independent audits happen every quarter. Outside legal counsel reviews every major contract. Nobody, not even me, has complete control anymore. The younger version of me would have called that paranoia. The older version calls it responsibility. People still ask whether I miss Nolan. Honestly, I miss the person I thought he was. I miss believing friendship could be unconditional. I miss the simplicity of trusting someone without asking questions. But I don't miss being naive. If this story has one lesson, it isn't that people are evil. Most aren't. It's that blind trust isn't love. It isn't loyalty. It isn't friendship. Trust should survive transparency. It should survive accountability. It should survive an audit. The people who become angry when you verify the numbers are usually the same people, hoping you'll never look at them. Losing my fiancé hurt. Losing my best friend hurt even more. Almost losing the company I built with my own hands nearly broke me. But surviving all of it taught me something worth far more than the money they tried to steal. Never hand someone the keys to your future simply because they've been standing beside you for years. Time doesn't prove character. Only choices do.